This week, a two-parter of Koom's reports from the Toronto Comic Arts Festival. On Thursday, we'll hear from Mulele and some other tablers. Today, an interview with power couple Eddie Campbell and Audrey Niffenegger. Audrey is the author of novels such as The Time Traveler's Wife, and she talks in this interview about working on the sequel. We'll also hear about the book Eddie and Audrey have put out together called Bizarre Romance, and Eddie's book The Goat Getters, about classic newspaper comic strips within the context of the newspapers that carried them. First, I'd like to thank our patrons for keeping this show going. Join them at patreon.com/deconcomics. This is Tim, and this is Deconstructing Comics.
Hi, this is Koom for Deconstructing Comics at TCAF 2018. And I'm here with Eddie Campbell and Audrey Niffenegger. Am I pronounced that correctly? Okay, awesome. So,
can you hear us both of them?
Yeah, as long as it's in the center. But if you don't mind leaning in whenever you can, right. But don't feel like it constrains you. So you're releasing Bizarre Romance, but I've been talking to Audrey about relationships, and I think I'd love to talk about that and your own insights, because much of your own work and the Alex stuff is about relationships.
Well, I'm glad you single that out, because that's the work I would like to be remembered for.
And you should be, yeah.
You know, it's the work that is most original and owes the least to the world of comics,
that's interesting.
Particularly to the world of American comics.
Yeah.
You know, I've drawn American comics. I've written and drawn American comics here and there, but I'm not attached to that genre. I can take it or leave it, but that personal stuff of mine is the best comics from a philosophical and formalist point of view.
Mm-hmm. We've interviewed you before. I don't know if you remember, but Kumar Sivasubramanian, who lives in Melbourne, has interviewed you on the phone.
Oh, okay.
So that was a few years ago, I think, when the Alec compilation came out. So
yep.
Yeah, and I've listened to that. But I also want to ask Audrey, were you interested in comics at all, like when you were growing up, like when you were an art student? Because it was still kind of...
Actually, comics were just kind of, I don't want to say elevating, but kind of levitating out of all the, what Eddie's calling American comics, but just, all that kind of corporate superhero stuff.
Yeah.
I was an art student from 81 to 85, and I remember seeing Raw while it was being serialized. And thinking, what is that? I was aware of Crom, and I had seen a lot of the kind of so-called indie or underground people were being serialized in the Chicago Reader, which was my Bible when I was a high school student. So I was really into it, really aware of it. I used to draw comics for my high school paper that were very influenced by the Surrealists, and always trying to be extremely offbeat and irreverent, so I felt a lot of kinship with this stuff that was happening back then. I didn't pursue it. I was hell-bent on artist books, so I went down a path that was adjacent but not identical.
Yeah, you mentioned Crom, like his wife Aileen was in town about a week and a half ago. Did you ever read like women's comics or any of that kind of stuff?
Sure.
Yeah. Cool. Okay, so just for listeners, the book has kind of come out of your collaborations together, although the division of labor seems to be very much Audrey writing and Eddie drawing. So is that kind of interesting? Is it affected by your relationship, or is it just kind of like a work practice that comes out of?
Really, it's quite simple. Audrey gave me all her short stories, and I made a book of them. That's it. But as I was telling you earlier, there was one story where Audrey had done these characters that were so nutty that I didn't have any actors in my repertory company.
Yeah, this is the first
of
story.
stock figures that I could cast.
Yeah, they were the sort of the detectives who were going to spy on
They're
the
the
ladies'
spies
husband.
and the white coats.
Yeah.
And so I said to Audrey, you're going to have to draw these characters. It's the only way they're going to work.
But did you rework them? Like,
No, if you
so-
look at them, they'll see that they're not drawn in an Eddie Campbell style.
No, I noticed that.
But it's the only story in the book where
But I mean, so much of the art here for me is a shift. Like, I can still see your, kind of caricature lines, but because you've used the computer so much, or you're using much more blocks of color as opposed to the line work, which I kind of associate with it.
there's one in there that's drawn in the old style, the rose red.
Oh, sure. But
Which is-
even the color kind of makes it pop out in a different way.
Which we rose red. We've shortened the title. The title's 3 weeks long, but we've shortened it to
It's
rose
kind
red.
of unusable title, yeah.
But that's probably the one story in there that's in a comic book style. We it's about a teenager who falls through a mirror
Yeah.
and finds herself in another dimension where she becomes the ruler of this dimension, and she sets about changing it to her liking and introduces Coca-Cola, fish fingers, and democracy in that order, which is a very teenage way of organizing concepts.
I was trying to get a sense of like the components of Audrey's writing through the stories. I have to be honest and say I haven't read The Time Traveler's Wife. Forgive me,
That's okay.
but
Many people have not read The Time Traveler's Wife.
but many people have. Anyway, so there's so one of the things is the relationships, like there's a sort of a 20-something, 30-something kind of searching for a partner in the modern world, but there's a fair degree of like whimsy and myth and like fairy story in here as well, in a very kind of postmodern kind of way. And I don't know if you like this comparison, but it really reminded me of Neil Gaiman, who you mentioned in the talk, as like, introducing you to Haley, and then Haley introducing you to Eddie. And the funny thing is, like, from what I know of Haley, she's written a book on Gaiman. So to me, like, Gaiman's kind of sensibility, where he'd have that mix of modern and fairy and kind of like little kind of quirky observations. Do you feel any kind of kinship with that?
Yeah, I mean, I feel Neil and I are almost the same age.
Right.
He's a couple years older than me.
So maybe some of the same influences.
Well, I feel like we're all... Something I've sort of laughingly complained about recently is that all the things I like have become very fashionable. And I need to get new things to like, because everywhere I turn, suddenly I'm just confronted by my own tastes, kind of amplified back at me by everybody I know.
Yeah.
But yeah, we're very fond of Neil. Eddie did a book not too long ago with Neil called The Truth is a Cave in the Black Mountains that was kind of not a fairy story exactly, but it had a real feeling of, this journey, and there's magic, and there's all this kind of I don't know, there's a feeling of a story that's been around for a very long time, but actually Neil just invented it. So yeah, I feel like a lot of people, Neil, Kelly Link, Chris Adrian, John Crowley, everybody's plugging into this form of fantasy that partakes very heavily of the ordinary, and infusing the real world with this kind of slightly suppressed chaos and fairies and other...
But could you let go of that? I feel like that's so integral to your work that it would just keep coming back.
Yeah, I would never let go of that, that kind of mix of the ordinary with a few elements of crazy.
Yeah, it's not just the supernatural, is it? There seems to be a whole number of categories of the unreal that are all been invited in.
Yeah. Sometimes at the same time.
Including surrealism and...
the surreal is good. Like the one...
ghosts and
with the angels, the infestation of angels, which is kind of like a play on, instead of an infestation of squirrels, the character has this infestation of angels, and the surreality is really the character of the story, not the person dealing with the problem, not the angels in the attic, but the tone of that. The mundane thing now becomes like fantastical, but yet nobody's treating it as fantastical. Right?
Sure.
Yeah.
Everybody in the stories agrees that this is just the way it is.
Yeah. Eddie, like, you've illustrated other people's work a number of times. You've done your own work. Is it hard at this point to? I mean, this is your wife now, so it shouldn't be hard. But like in general, is it hard to illustrate other people's work?
No, not more so than not myself. First there's the story, and then I find the style that's right for the story, whether it's my story or somebody else's, and I'm just as objective about it one way or the other. And as it happens, each story in this volume demanded a different style, because Audrey's not writing these as though they were
comics,
chapters or incidents that are happening in the same environment or universe, as we say in comics. Each one has its own world. Right. Each one recreates it creates its own world anew for each story. And so each one demanded, like for instance, the story about Muybridge's model.
Mm-hmm. That's my favorite one in the book. I just have to say, it doesn't even really seem to have a proper ending, quote unquote proper, but I just love it because I always loved Muybridge. And it's about, was she a real model? Okay, so a real model of Edward Muybridge, who did these photographic studies of motion in the early days of the photograph, and I always loved those because they translate to comics very well. Like people like Frank Miller, when he was really good in the early days, really focused on that, like those moments in time, and I loved that story. But please go on.
But yeah, it's the one story that has nothing of any of these unreal aspects that we're talking about. This was a down-to-earth, real. Another one like that, actually, which
on the boat at the end.
Well, that one tips into the supernatural. Remember, it's got an element of horror about it. But the other one I really like is Digging Up the Cat. It's completely mundane.
Right.
So it's autobiographical. Audrey is having to. Audrey's parents are moving house, and Audrey has been told, "Look, we have to dig the cat. We're trying to sell this house.
Right.
You're going to have to take the cat with you." So Audrey's gone round there to dig up the cat and take it and bury it afresh in her current house where she's living. And there's a sense of it's not the macabre, but the morbid. There's a morbid contemplation of worms and decay. But I've drawn the whole thing as though it is a suburban woman tending to her rhubarb patch, or planting her basil and herb, planting her herbs. I've brought out a totally mundane thing in the pictures, while there's this morbid contemplation in the words, so that the two seem to be in conflict with each other.
Oh, that's interesting. That's why you did that. See, that's also one of the most computerized ones. And you were saying earlier that you're going to color from hell, release it as a color version, and I didn't really believe you, and I still sort of don't, because to me, I associate you with that very black and white line. I mean, I'm sure you were going for that for the period when you did From Hell, but also like your autobiographical stuff. But yeah, like in The Fate of the Artist, you're starting to do like a little bit of collage, and you're using the computer. So I wonder if, and then by the time you get to that story with the cats, it's so computerized. It's almost got a very flat kind of computerized kind of generative kind of thing. Are you kind of going in that direction? Are you sick of scratching away at the...
No, that was one style. The Muybridge story is entirely done in grey gouache.
Yeah, sure.
The Rose Red story is in black ink with with colours added. There's one story in it, the Seville one's got a lot of photographic stuff that's been collaged and distorted. There's a lot of distortion, every story's got its own, demands its own approach. I don't think of it as computerized. Do you think of it?
Well, the From Hell colouring is looking almost like printmaking. There's a watercolour-esque quality to a lot of what he's doing, but
With From Hell?
yeah. I mean,
So how are you applying it? Are you actually taking a
I'll
paintbrush?
show you in a minute.
No.
Yeah, sure. But for listeners, maybe you could just say, are you using the computer more or the paint?
I'm doing it entirely on the computer.
Okay.
There's so many things you can do on the computer.
That's true.
When they talked about the colouring From Hell way back 20 years ago, before it was out as a big book, and I said, no, that won't work. Because colouring then meant colouring it with wet inks.
Yeah.
And it could only ever get darker. But I can take a patch of blood that is now black and I can make it red. I can take a sky that is cross-hatched with black lines and I can make those blue lines. I can put another blue behind it, and then we've got a rich pattern, sky. But it's not. I'm changing the black drawing into colour drawings.
I hesitate to ask, but was this something you had to tentatively bring up with Alan and say, Alan, what do you think about colour?
Yeah, he was suspicious of the idea, but I convinced him.
Oh,
This is something I want to do. When I show it to you, you'll go, oh.
Well, I've already got ideas in my mind now, so I'm like, you must still be engaged with the project if you're dealing, because I was worried you might be so sick of people coming up to you and saying, I love From Hell, and you're like, well, I was illustrating somebody else's words, I do my own thing, kind of
Well, there's also the opportunity to fix a lot of stuff.
Oh, sure.
There's a lot of continuity problems in From Hell.
Okay. See, I thought I was always part of its character, its charm, that it was a bit, sputtering or juddering, especially because it was published in very finite slices.
Yeah.
No, you're gonna.
well, he's not erasing the hand in From Hell. It's still very much the kind of jagged and kind of startling style, but. Anyway, he'll show you.
Yeah, I was telling him it's like my favorite book ever, so that's why. But we can move away from that.
It'll still be there for you.
Yeah, you're one of the few collaborators that Alan still kind of talks to, and also allows to do collaborations with again. So you're very fortunate there, I think. But anyway, you were saying that you'd been married before. Audrey, you hadn't been married at all. You'd done a couple of jobs on the short stories for which blog? Which short stories did you originally meet and?
The first one we did was for the Guardian newspaper in London. They gave over their Sunday colour magazine to comics one week, but the idea they had was let's match authors and comic artists.
Right.
Yeah. Non-comics people. Novelists do comics was the header.
So Dave Gibbons was matched with.
Right.
Was it Margaret Atwood?
No, he wasn't. He was.
Who just lives.
Oh, does she?
Oh, she lives in Toronto. She's a Toronto icon.
Yeah, no, I've met her. She's. I know she's local.
Somebody else was matched with Margaret Atwood. I can't remember. Anyway, but the idea was novelists do comics. The novelist would write a short story and a comic artist. And since we were in proximity, we were dating.
Dave Eggers collaborated with himself. I thought that was a bit cheaty.
Well, that's Dave Eggers doing his postmodern thing. But so, anyway, so you met then, but were you still married at the time?
No.
We actually met, a year and a half before that? So...
Yeah.
At the party?
Yeah. So...
No, that was you met Haley at the party.
You met Haley at the party.
Haley introduced us when I needed a place to stay in London. Audrey had a London flat.
Wow.
Which she doesn't. It's usually just there. Audrey uses it 2, 3, 4 times a year. But
I was over there quite a lot when I got it.
But nobody would have been in it. I thought I was just borrowing a flat. But Audrey was going to be there.
And is that when Sparks just...
Oh, yes.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, more or less immediately.
She wasn't interested at first.
I just thought, I shouldn't be, taking advantage of the guests.
Well, he was probably happy for you to be taking advantage of him.
Anyway.
Did you at some point, like, when you did realize there was something there, go and pick up all of his, like, Alex stuff? Because that's supposed to be fairly autobiographical. Say, I want to, like, research who this guy is.
Well, I had known Haley, Eddie's daughter, for about 6 years, and I'd
So
always
she
actually
passed
sort
it
of
on.
avoided the Alex stuff because I thought, well, a little bit of an invasion of Haley's privacy, perhaps. I don't know. I knew they existed, but
Uh-huh.
when Eddie and I first met, we went off to our homes on opposite sides of the globe, and then we sent each other boxes of books, and everybody sat down and had a big reading fiesta. I think I gave you one of my novels when we first met, I think.
Yeah, I took away a copy of Time Travel.
That's right, yeah.
I read it on the train trip up to stay with my parents.
Yeah, but I had already read From Hell back before the movie came out, even so early 90s. And you had sent me a copy of Fate of the Artist
After
I knew Haley.
After I blogged about you.
Yeah, that's right.
So we knew of each other.
What did you find in each other's works that either you found was really different or interesting or that you connected with?
Well, of course, the Alec books are extraordinary. I mean, you feel like you're sort of spying on Eddie and his family.
And they're very confessional in a roundabout kind of playful way. But like the way he presents Alec McGarry is not always in the most positive light.
Yeah, no, that's
Someone
what
who's
makes
fumbling
them...
through,
Well, it's not supposed to be a confession. To me,
Not a
to me,
confession,
it's
but-
story material. To me, the most authentic story material is the stuff you've seen for yourself. You're not taking.
Yeah.
You're not going to lengths to take it from a reputable source. You know it's French and original because it happened just there. I saw it. I was in it. I was part of it. If I tell it straight without torturing it into the shape of a conventional story, then that is the most original story that I can do. That was my thinking. But
Well, your style was highly original because both the pictures and the writing, like I don't know if you feel the same way about the writing, but there's a kind of a really, it's like rubber bands that are elastic bands that are constantly being pulled and stretched and pinging back every time you read them between the panels, and it's a really hard thing to like capture in words what you're doing, and that's a really high compliment for me. But at the same time, there's something louche about Alec and his like flitting between women and trying his best to be on the make, but not in a totally negative way, in a very relatable way, but yet in a way that would make, I think, if you were in the story, guarded, if that's the best way I could put it. I don't know if you felt that at all, or...
Well, it's kind of unique in a way to be able to meet somebody when they're in their 50s and
That's right. It's behind
encounter their selves from
the spirit of the 20s.
previous decades. Yeah, I mean, that's the nice thing about being an artist or a writer is you can show somebody that thing you made when you were 21 or 35 and they can experience that without a whole lot of I mean, if we told the same stories to each other now, they would seem different than if you just show the piece of art you made from back when.
They'd be reinterpreted through the lens of bitter experience.
Yes, or like you'd sanitize it so much, you'd put it in its box, you'd have processed it and dealt with it. Whereas this is kind of a real life snapshot in a way that photo or video could not be. But like if you take a look at the Fate of the Artist, which is like years later, and I can see like Eddie's like, what's he going to say? What's he going to criticize me for? But what I find really interesting is there's still that sense of self-observation or that sense of putting oneself under a microscope, because all of your habits, from like working at the table, from planning to do something and not like carrying it out, or like all these little things, like let's say the characters being scrutinized, and then there's a constant tension with the wife. And once again, I don't know if it's autobiographical. I don't really need you to say if it is. But yet at the same time, there's that feeling of guardedness or dread, like this is not something that's normal, like or like healthy in the way stories are. Like it's not all going to end happily. It's this bouncing of marbles and rubber bands. I mean, like, do you see any of the seeds of the dissolution of your marriage and the fate of the artist?
No, they're
projecting.
They're probably all in The Lovely Horrible Stuff, which is my book about money.
Yeah, The Lovely Horrible Stuff I think is underrated because
which I confess I haven't read. I'm sorry.
That's all right. It's an economics lesson, but it's also very personal, and it's a kind of a travelogue as well. So there's a lot going on in that one. I actually really like that one a lot. But yeah, there's some tense moments in there that I think I can't really know. I'm just the reader in that situation, but it's an interesting book.
It's the book in which a Scotsman shares with you all his knowledge of money, and we usually like to keep it to ourselves.
Interesting. Okay, so you sent each other books across the sea, and then you read them. What happened next?
Lots of dates that lasted weeks and weeks.
So you would fly to one place or the other and spend time?
Or meet up in London, yeah.
Or Munich. We were both guests
right.
at a festival in Munich. That was an interesting one.
It was in the 90s. It was so hot. And we were sitting around in this beer garden with people like Posey Simmons, which was kind of idyllic. Posey is amazing.
Sure.
She's a great English cartoonist.
Yeah.
Oh, no, I know her stuff.
Yeah.
Emma Bovary.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
But anyway, Munich was pretty crazy. But yeah, I don't know how many continents we managed to date on.
Dated on three continents. I don't actually like to go anywhere. I don't like to leave the house.
That's funny because in The Fate of the Artist, they're complaining that you're off to festivals all the time.
No, I hate it.
Says the man who's in Toronto for a festival.
I've described myself as a homebody in 3 continents.
Well, that's good if you're an artist, because if you're wanting to go out all the time, you never get anything done. So was it hard to then decide like one place to like live together, or?
Not really. I just moved into Audrey's house.
Yeah, but I mean, like it must have been hard to like leave Australia and the weather there, and no.
I was ready to leave.
You were ready.
It was time to get out. Because Hayley, my daughter, lives in London. I've got another daughter who now lives in Edinburgh. And as you met my son earlier today, he's now in Toronto, so they're all over the place.
That's great. How did he end up in Toronto?
We don't know. We're still trying to figure that out.
Was it for work or?
I know. I'll speak to him tonight.
Because like very few people, like I grew up in England, and I've been wanting to get back for ages, and now I just accept I'm here. Like Toronto is my home, but I live between 4 and 10 in Leeds. Oh. And I still go and visit when I can. I love the UK, and there's just something about the history and the landscape that you just can't find here. Although it's lovely here, and there are many pluses to being here, and I'm very fortunate that our dad brought us here. But I don't know, Chicago winters. I mean, it must be a real change.
No better and no worse than Glasgow winters.
Oh, that too, yeah. Yeah.
Coming up, The Time Traveler's Wife sequel, The Goat Getters, and When Eddie as a Kid Wanted to be Jack Kirby. First, just a reminder that you can help this podcast by making your Amazon purchases via deconstructingcomics.com/Amazon and make that your bookmark for future purchases. We'll then get a percentage of what you spend. It costs you nothing extra and helps us cover web hosting and the other costs of presenting this show every week. We really appreciate your support.
This is an imaginary podcast, which may never have happened.
The Shortbox Showcase.
But then again may have. About a father and daughter. I'm Professor Allen.
And I'm Emily.
Who came from Ohio and talked about comics.
Walking Dead.
Tintin.
Black Lightning.
White Tiger. It tells of their rise to glory, when the great guests were yet to be booked.
Let's put it this way, Shogun Warriors wasn't going to win any Eisners.
And the great feats of editing not yet performed.
This is Ultra 7, this is Ultraman Jack, and this Ultraman Taro, and this Ultraman Leo, and this
of how they spoke at length.
Continuity is really the brainchild of nitpicking nerds the world over.
But to be fair, the best kind of confession is the Force confession.
And reviewed in brief tales that explore creatively the bounds of a given character's history.
Red Sun is wonderful with a very strange ending.
Of brilliant creators before their fall from grace. This is the era where Miller is at the height of his creative and artistic powers, and the ability of strong writing to encapsulate and transcend its time.
Flash of Two Earths by Gardner Fox.
This is an imaginary podcast. Aren't they all? Shortbox Showcase is part of the Relatively Geeky family of podcasts. Check us out on the web at relativelygeekypodcast.blogspot.com or search in iTunes for Relatively Geeky or Shortbox Showcase. And remember, we're not experts.
We're just family.
Have you found that, like, the relationship has impacted the direction of either of your own individual, so either your comics or your own writing?
Not yet, because we're both still involved in things that we'd started before meeting. For instance, Audrey is writing the sequel, has been for the last 5 years, the sequel to The Time Traveler's Wife. So we haven't got to the stage where we're starting new things yet. Are you going to get it done in time, darling?
I don't know. I just got an extension. That was a great day.
Are you still figuring some stuff out? And
about 6 months ago, big chunks of plot finally slid into place. So now I'm just writing furiously, trying to solidify what I understand at last about what I'm doing.
I really like time travel. Do you deal with any of the physics aspects at all in your...
Well, I mean, when you're doing time travel, you always have this conundrum of what's causing it or allowing it. And in the case of The Time Traveler's Wife, the mechanism is a genetic mutation.
Okay.
Which means that our hero, Henry de Campbell, ends up involuntarily time traveling, and he can't bring anything, so it's just him.
Kind of like a Benjamin Button kind of thing?
Kind of.
But except he's jumping periods instead of just...
Yeah, I have to confess that I read Benjamin Button after my book came out, and Brad Pitt was suddenly going to make that movie.
Mm-hmm.
So I went, F. Scott Fitzgerald has been here. But, it wasn't any kind of influence on me.
Sure.
But probably the biggest influence for me was Jack Finney, who wrote Time and Again. That's a brilliant book. You should read that. The movie's also pretty good.
Okay.
But
I'm always happy to read.
Yeah.
And I do want to read The Time Traveler's Wife. It's just...
Don't worry, no homework for you. But yeah, the mechanism for time travel, I think, depending on how each world is built and what allows this time travel, I think it really changes the kind of stories you can tell.
Uh-huh.
So if you're H.G. Wells and the character is hopping into the time machine, you get one kind of thing going on,
Sure.
It's a kind of scientific inquiry.
Sure.
With my characters, it's just kind of gradually messing with their ability to have a coherent life.
Right.
And what I always used to say was that it was a cubist portrait of a marriage. So it was allowing me to juxtapose Claire and Henry, all different ages and different times and so forth, because she's just a normal person, gradually getting older. But he might encounter her when he's 42 and she's 6, or she could be 35 and he's 24. So there's a lot going on in terms of how a person is at any given age and what that allows them to know about other people and how much emotional range they have at any given age. So that was fun. That's a fascinating thing. And the book that I'm writing, the sequel, is called The Other Husband, and it's about Henry and Claire's daughter, Alba. And it's actually more complicated to deal with because I have everything that already happened in the first book that I have to intermingle and work around.
Mm-hmm.
So the timelines for this thing are incredibly complicated.
Interesting. Have you ever read Einstein's Dreams?
Sure.
Yeah.
That's a great book.
That is a great book, and it has some real nice, ideas that go all over. We should probably check the time, because I know you have dinner. What time?
6.
At 6, so how are you doing for time?
We're okay. We can go as long as another half hour if you want.
We'll do a few more minutes for sure, at least. Okay, so I know, Eddie, you said you're working on something new, and you just talked about your sequel. So you said you were drawing pages furiously for something? Or did you mean the From Hell?
Probably the From Hell.
Okay, all right.
Obliquely referring to.
Yeah, maybe. Or maybe you were just
but
putting
the
me
other-
off because I was bugging
But
you.
my other interest at the moment is in history of cartooning, and I've got a new book out. It's called The Goat Getters, and it's a thorough, detailed exposition of a phase of cartooning that has never been addressed. For instance, we know that the daily comic strip, that is the comic strip that appears 7 days a week in perpetuity, really begins with Mutt and Jeff. There were little sequence panel comics that appeared in papers before that, but this is the first one that appears daily with the intention of appearing forever.
Sure.
And this happened on the sports page. It was a little sports page cartoon. A couple of years later, Crazy Cat first appears on the sports page. 3 or 4 years after that, Barney Google first appears on the sports page. And these are all among the couple of dozen most famous comic strip characters ever. And they start on the sports page. I thought, what's going on there? Why is that? What's the story behind this? And so I've gone back and I've thought one of the mistakes they make in writing about the history of comics is that they take the comics out of the newspaper, the colour funnies. They take the colour when Bill Blackbeard made his huge San Francisco Academy of Comic Art collection of the old funnies, he took out the funnies and threw the rest of the paper away. He wasn't collecting that. Now, newspapers were full of other kinds of cartoons. And when you go back and look at the newspaper as a holistic environment, the cartoons are referencing the news, they're referencing each other. There's a whole lot of things going on in this environment that we don't know about if you just take out the comic section. The comic section was kind of designed to be taken out because it was meant for kids. And kids are not really interested in what's going on in the world. They just want to know what's going on in the comics, or in their own particular world, which is a world in miniature. And the comics was a world in miniature. But there was all these other kinds of cartoons. There were cartoons on the editorial pages, cartoons on the magazine pages, which were the women's pages, and the sports pages, which were the men's pages. And these cartoons weren't necessarily about sports, these cartoons on the sports pages. They were cartoons of interest to the adult male.
That's what I figured. I figured they were targeting the male, and they were probably thinking he wants something in between reading about the scores, or maybe the less serious male who's not going to read politics is going to read the cartoons, right?
Those cartoons. He might also read the politics. He's got the whole paper. He can look at all of it. And the sports pages cartoons typically happened in the evening paper. And something I didn't realise was the evening paper is a completely different paper from the morning paper.
Right.
The evening world had a completely different staff and editors from the morning world, because the morning world was the edition that went into the home, and the woman of the house read it, and so all the advertising for furniture would be in that edition. Whereas all the racing results were in the evening paper that the guy picked up in the street at the newsstand, or from the boy yelling extra, extra. And there's two completely different. The whole set of the paper is different. It's a different animal altogether. I didn't realise this until I get into this, and it's all alien to us now because we get our news off the internet and few of us actually buy a complete newspaper and experience that whole environment.
Yeah,
as it used to be.
They're sort of bite-sized now.
Yeah, we get our news because we Google a subject.
That's
and
it.
We get a little bit from here, a little bit from there,
That's
a little
it.
bit from there.
That's it.
And we no longer get all these parts interrelating.
Sure.
The way that used to happen without a paper newspaper. And this is kind of what my book is about. So that one of the most interesting and funny sections in the paper is a running counterpoint between the cartoons of Nell Brinkley in the women's section and of Tad Dorgan in the sports section, where Tad was mercilessly making fun of Nell Brinkley in a way that I suppose today would be called harassment. But Nell was a great cartoonist, and she survived in a man's world, and she did wonderful work. She was a great draftsman. Her drawing was impeccable. She could draw a motor car much better than I can draw a motor car.
Mm-hmm. But that generation of people just were. You just look at their line work and you just go,
They could draw horses. We hadn't a clue, because they saw horses more than we hadn't a clue how to draw horses.
But I think they
today.
just practiced like a lot more than we do. And now we go, well, that's their style. And whereas at one time there was an aspiration for a certain pedigree of, anyway.
So that's what my book's about. It's not really just about sports cartooning, it's about all of cartoons. But it focuses on that because that's the beginning of the daily comic. And I'm interested in all these different kinds of cartoons, the editorial cartoon, the comic strip, the big head caricature, which is a kind of cartoon portraiture.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the celebrity portrait, the big head with a little body. That's another genre of cartoons. They used to do them on cigarette cars with famous baseball players or footballers. We used to get them in England, and it's another kind of cartoon. There's all these different kind of cartoons. I've even found a genre of cartoon that nobody's ever written about. I won't get into it here; it's too complicated. But it's in my book, The Goat Gators.
I'd have to read it. It's one of the very many things I have yet to read. They're really promoting the book How to Read Nancy at the festival.
Oh yeah,
I haven't read that either, but I think those guys are great too.
Big book.
Didn't you find that this festival feels like a tsunami of stuff you haven't read?
Not just that, but like you can't move, you can't get to like the things you want to get to and so on. So last year was very busy for me, but this year I just focused on your interview, and I'll interview Jaime Hernandez hopefully if that goes well tomorrow. But it's just been this, jostling, and the older I get, the more tired I get. Like just crowds leached out of me.
It's a great. I love this Toronto Comic Arts Festival.
It's a fantastic festival.
We just arrived yesterday.
Magnificent.
We went out to dinner, and the thing is, because it's compact, it's easy to meet people. I can't go out of the room without meeting someone.
Yeah.
I found myself at dinner last night. There were 8 of us, and everybody around the table was a significant person. There was Seth, there was Chester Brown, Jaime Hernandez,
Sure,
Françoise Murley, Audrey and myself.
And Peter and Natalie from
the Big
Island, which was lovely to meet them. They're really fun. Everybody was really in fun form, and you just sit there thinking, wow, these people all make incredible things.
Yeah.
This is a great show for bringing people together.
That's a bountiful time in comics too, I think. Were you always interested in the formalism of comics? Like one of the things I really liked in your Alec thing was when you sort of devoted this whole chunk to what was happening in the 80s, and you sort of put, Alan and Columbia and the big numbers thing all under the...
How to Be an Artist.
Yeah.
That is the most surrealistically cheeky book I've ever done.
And I love it. I so love those pages of Alan on the ostrich, and it's just, I hope you just took that in good humor because it's fantastic stuff.
And I didn't know what Al Columbia looked like, so I drew him as a smile. I drew his face as a smiley button.
I remember.
And then when he has a meltdown and falls out with everyone, he scribbles across his smiley button, and so his face for the rest of the story is a scribbled out smiley button.
So were you always just interested while doing comics in the formalism of comics, or did that kind of evolve out of, being at the right place at the right time?
Well, this is what comics do. Comics are a rich pictorial language, and it's not, on the surface, my work might sometimes look like it's literal. I'm drawing the absolutely literal what you see, and then you read a book like that, and it's nuts. The whole thing's nuts.
No, but it's great. You make connections that are really hard to parse out, and that's the beauty of them. There are these really odd, intuitive connections that he makes that I just find really interesting, and that's why I find that stuff. Yeah, it's a magic that seems to kind of come naturally out of your hand, which is really. But so were you always interested, or was it just the infection of working in the comics that brought that out of you?
Well, yeah, I was always. Always. When I was 3, when I was 4.
Yeah.
I was a cowboy when I was 4.
Mm-hmm.
The fact that I was living in an industrial town didn't stop me. You are what you are in your head.
That's it.
And then one day I learned that comics, they weren't just a window into another dimension. They were drawn by artists. And when I realized, I think I saw that because I picked up a comic that was signed. I think Kirby and Lee had put their signatures in one of the corner. At first I thought somebody had written on my comic. I thought somebody had vandalised my comic by putting his name on it.
Yeah.
And I thought, well, no, wait a minute, this is part of the thing. And it took me a while to work it out, that this was the writer and the artist.
Sure. How old were you, 5 or something?
No, something like that, 6, 7, or something like that.
Yeah.
I could read by this time. And I thought, that's what I want to be. I want to be the person who drew this. Well, at the time, I wanted to be the person I wanted to be Jack Kirby.
Sure.
I wanted to literally be the person who drew this.
Who wouldn't want to be Jack Kirby?
At some point, I realised I couldn't be him because somebody else was him. That was taken. I realised I was going to have to draw my own. And then you go through that phase where you realise you're just a klutz.
Mm.
You can't be Jack Kirby because you're a useless klutz.
Mm.
And you go through this 9-year-old despair. Where you throw it on the ground and you stomp on it because this isn't going to work because my drawing is shit.
You're lucky you got that out of your system.
And you get that out of your system.
Yeah.
Perhaps you do some cute little thing. You say, oh, wait a minute. I just drew a cute little duck. Maybe this will work.
Yeah.
There's a little ducky. A little rubber ducky, a little yellow. I'll draw another one. Oh, that was better than the first one. And if you don't dwell on it too much, you can step by step become a person of worth.
Sure.
You could become Audrey Niffenegger.
Well, I want to ask
the famous book artist and novelist.
How did Audrey go from art school to becoming a writer, and how did you find your way to where you are?
Well, my mother's an artist, and her mother was very artistic, and to me it was just a thing people did. I didn't have to go through that process of realizing that people made stuff because I could see my mother making stuff.
Yeah.
My mother's mostly a textile artist, but
my dad was in textiles.
Yeah, so
I just found out recently that I get some of my artistic interest from him, and he kept that so close to the vest.
Oh, interesting.
Because he had to change his profession when he came here. Anyway, go on.
Sure, yeah. I mean, my mother never went to art school, but she was very encouraging for me to do that.
Sure.
And so the whole way through, I've been writing and drawing and trying to get the writing and drawing together. And in a way, it's kind of strange that I didn't become a comics artist,
right.
But I got into this idea that I would do artist books, that I would do the whole thing. I would do the printing and the binding, and I got really into etching when I was in high school, so I wanted the tactile side of things as well, like for the paper to be handmade paper and to have the printing be really, a little more interesting than Offset, and to have the whole production be under my control. So the upside of that is the books are really beautiful. The downside is that I tended to make editions of about 10.
Yeah, you have only so much time, and
there's a limit to what you can do with that.
And you said you were a control freak, but I sort of heard perfectionist at the thing. So
to me, same old equivalent. But it's a little bit of an accident that I'm more known for writing, I guess. But The Time Traveler's Wife was an idea that I couldn't render in pictures. Time is really difficult to show in still images. Comics can do it because there are words, but it didn't occur to me to do it as a graphic novel, and I think it took me 5 years to write it just as a novel, and I think I would still be producing it if it had been a graphic novel.
So did you, even though it was words, did you kind of still take that exacting, laborious process to it where you went over it and tried to like fine-tune?
Sure.
Yeah, you did.
The thing about Audrey's books, the Three Incestuous Sisters and The Adventurers, is that they are commercial manifestations of what were originally handmade books in very limited editions with handmade paper and everything. So they, at some point, they took those books, or somebody.
Yeah, Abrams published those.
Took those books and turned them into a commercial book, that could be.
Yeah.
But the originals were handmade.
Well, I remember in the 90s when certain things began to be published. Like, I remember standing in a bookshop on Michigan Avenue in Chicago, seeing Griffin and Sabine by Nick Bantock.
Yeah, I have those.
Yeah, and
those
I looked at that and I'm like,
what is that? And I picked it up and I was looking at it. I'm like, this is not for children. This is a picture book and it is not for children. Hallelujah, the revolution is upon us.
Sure.
Because I thought, now we're gonna be able to publish all this stuff, and that was true, but it just took a little longer than I thought,
I wonder what he's up to, because I think he's from Vancouver.
He's still putting out books. Yeah.
Is he? Because the last one I read of his was a long time ago, The Venetian's Wife.
Right. He still puts out all kinds of things, but he's done. I think there's been about 7 of those Griffin and Sabine books. I recently.
Has there been 7 now? I got tired by the 3rd one, to be honest with you.
You could tell that he's kind of extending it beyond what it wanted to be.
Yeah.
Extended, but I recently reviewed. I had the last one to review from the Washington Post, and I said, you're gonna have to send me all of them. So they did, and it was really interesting to reread them all in one go.
Sure.
But the first one had so much promise and so many unanswered questions that it was kind of perfect unto itself. And I'm almost sorry that he carried on, because it was so enigmatic. But I remember seeing that and thinking, all right, now we can publish things not for children. My work usually involves a lot of nudity.
Sure.
So, anyway, I just got all excited because every time I tried to make something for children, it would go horribly wrong and become very adult. So I was ready for the current crop of visual books for adults.
It's not so much the nudity, it's the darkness. There's often a...
Children's books can be quite dark.
Sure, there's often
but they get away with it because it's not right. It's not tickling you on the surface as much.
Yeah, what you don't want in children's books is that kind of overt sexuality. Like, whatever strange sexual tensions are in children's books, they tend to be kind of buried deep. Like in fairy tales, there's a lot of weirdness going on, but not in the most literal
But the trauma is not
surface.
so
Yeah.
present. Yeah.
Bizarre Romance is published in the US by Abrams Comic Arts and by Penguin in the UK. The Goat Getters is published by IDW. Tell us what you think. Write us at mail@deconstructingcomics.com or contact us through social media. Find all the links on the right sidebar at deconstructingcomics.com. We're also on the Comics Podcast Network at comicspodcasts.com and on comiccon.com, where our new episodes go up on Fridays, give or take a day. Also, please give us a review on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Google Play, iHeartRadio, or wherever you find podcasts. Tell the rest of the world why you enjoy Deconstructing Comics. Our theme is from bensound.com. Once again, don't forget to help support the show with a pledge at patreon.com/deconcomics. This coming Thursday, more from TCAF with Mark LaLiberty of the 4-panel comics anthology series, Harmony Becker, who we last heard from at Kaigai Manga Festa here in Tokyo last fall, Molly Muldoon, writer of several graphic novels, and then Koom wraps up with a long talk with Mulele about the good, bad, and ugly of his trip to TCAF. Till then, this is Tim, and thanks for listening to Deconstructing Comics.